Hello everyone and welcome to another video by Genshin. Today, I'm trying out a new video format with a voice-over commentary in contrast to my older guides which were all just subtitled. I've actually used my real voice before twice, once in my original video detailing the eponymous group 16 of the periodic table and another time when explaining the science of dreaming. The ranking in this tier list is based on my experience playing these characters, watching other people's guides, or performing damage calculations, and is thus bound to reflect my personal opinion. It's perfectly reasonable if some of you disagree with the rankings I gave, so feel free to discuss your views respectfully in the comments section. Since the difficulty of the game's main storyline is low, any low investment free-to-play characters can clear most of the game quite smoothly. There are lots more characters that are wonderfully fun to play, yet reasonably strong, but regrettably won't make it into this list. We will be limited to discussing the most broken characters for the current 2.3 endgame content, such as the Spiral Abyss and Energy Amplifier. Now let's hop into my personal ranking of the top 10 characters in Genshin Impact. Coming in at number 10, we have Venti. In Genshin Impact's early days, Venti was unquestionably one of the most overpowered characters available, with insane energy generation and enemy grouping abilities with his elemental burst. The 1.6 elemental mastery buff further bolstered his already respectable damage output. While he hasn't exactly fallen far from grace, and also finds utility in the Viridescent Veneera resistance shred, there is also a growing number of enemies which Venti's Q cannot casually exterminate. Kairagi, big Rift Hounds, Spectres, Rune Robots, Mirror Maidens, Abyss Lectors and Heralds and boss enemies. The list of mobs with bloated HP pools, yet can't be crowd controlled, grows larger with every cycle of the Abyss. Nonetheless, Venti still provides the strongest suction in the game, and is your panacea for all small enemies which can fall victim to his cyclone. Elegantly skating in at number 9, we have Ayaka. As a cryo DPS, Ayaka makes wonderful use of the Blizzard Strayer set for a massive 40% crit rate boost against frozen enemies. She thus finds a comfortable place as the main damage dealer of freeze comps, which decimate the growing number of CC immune, bloodthirsty enemies like Inazumi's Kairagi, Geovishaps and Rune Robots. Her elemental burst has an insane damage multiplier approaching 4000% at level 8, and given how freeze teams often run 2 cryo members for the resonance, Ayaka's energy regeneration is quite manageable. She is also one of the fastest cryo appliers in the game, as her sprint provides 100% uptime on her normal attack's elemental infusion. This grants her a useful niche in rapidly dismantling the shield of Abyss Lectors. Ayaka's primary drawback is poor access to amplifying elemental reactions like Melt due to her heavy reliance on keeping enemies frozen, but this doesn't stop her from dishing out tremendous burst damage within seconds regardless. Moving on to the 8th place, we have our resident chef Xiangling. Her universal treatment of all enemies as mere ingredients for her next meal isn't too far from the truth. Anything that stands in range of a pyro needle gets burnt to a crisp, be it the Mylite reaction happening on Whopper Flowers or the 3rd degree burns inflicted on Fatuis who dare brave the flame. Xiangling is arguably the best AoE pyro damage dealer in the entire game. Being a pyro DPS also grants Xiangling access to amplifying reactions Melt and Vaporize, so you can pair her with various teammates like Xingqiu, Chongyun and Kaya. From the classic national team to Child Vape, Xiangling is the main damage dealer in almost all her team comps. Her viability is further bolstered by the presence of a fantastic free-to-play weapon in the catch, as well as the Emblem artifact set, which can be farmed with little opportunity cost. Not to mention, a copy of Xiangling is guaranteed to all players from effectively the beginning of the game, making her power universally accessible. She is almost always paired with Bennett, who is not only her battery, but also provides a snapshotable damage boost to her Pyronado. Apparating into the 7th place is our channel mascot Hu Tao. As a high-risk, high-reward damage dealer, Hu Tao is a superlative single-target pyro DPS. Though a fair bit of her power is locked behind 5-star weapons and her first constellation, her inbuilt kit comes with an unrivaled amount of pyro damage bonus and attack boost upon activating her E skill. Hu Tao's viability has been indirectly boosted in recent Abyss rotations, with the growing number of single target scenarios for her to unload on. As she is usually paired with a shielder like Zhongli, Toma or C4 Yanfei, Hu Tao's burst provides self-sufficient healing that maintains her low HP damage boost. Her natural bulkiness and frequent dash cancelling also provides surprising resilience against aggressive enemies. The introduction of Rift Hounds is arguably a boost, as Hu Tao is kept on the brink of death by corrosion without being overhealed by her teammates like Xingqiu. The huge damage multiplier on her elemental burst also makes her viable as a burst DPS to eradicate enemy hordes or even bosses in a flash, sending them straight to the grave. Let's move on to the 6th place, none other than Li Yue's Coco Goat Ganyu. Prior to her release, she was hypothesized to play a supporting role, and this prediction turned out fairly accurate. She is a respectable burst support for Pyro teams with swift cryo application and 100% uptime on her burst. However, Ganyu is best known for being a top-tier ranged AoE DPS that picks off enemy hordes and bosses alike from a safe distance. The total multiplier of her blooming charge shots that can be fired every 3 seconds is almost 550% at level 8, rivaling that of most elemental bursts. Just like Ayaka, she's a great user of Blizzard Strayer, but can also use the wondrous troop set that drops from world bosses. Though freeze teams are reliable for keeping enemies stuck in place as they are slowly exterminated within their frozen shells, melt teams featuring Xiangling provide even greater damage at the cost of being able to attack from afar. Much of Ganyu's power can be harnessed even at 0 constellations, and her Achilles heel of being vulnerable while charging her shots is mitigated by her E skill, which taunts aggressive enemies from afar while she attacks them. Eternally sitting in 5th place is the Electron Archon's puppet Raiden Shogun. Did I actually write Electron? I meant Electro Archon. Raiden Shogun. At 90 energy, Raiden's burst is the most expensive in the game but does a massive amount of damage to boot. However, her main capabilities lie neither in her burst damage nor in her E-skill's off-field DPS capabilities. Instead, Raiden's viability primarily comes from her ability to skyrocket the team's elemental burst damage. Not only is she a universal battery for all team members, she also directly buffs the damage of their elemental bursts by an amount proportional to their energy cost. This makes Raiden's national team one of the most powerful in the game, as she entirely mitigates the energy regeneration issues that often plague burst rotation teams. All while doing this, she buffs her own elemental burst damage to enormous amounts, rapidly dispatching boss enemies that the national team comparatively struggles against. Next up in 4th place we have Xingqiu, the game's premier Hydro support and sub-DPS. Xingqiu provides an impressively fast rate of Hydro application through his elemental burst, while simultaneously dealing decent off-field damage. He thus forms the cornerstone of Vape comps and Taser comps, and can also find a place in Freeze comps. His sheer versatility and ability to occupy such diverse niches means he almost never finds himself outclassed, and earns a place above many offensive juggernauts on this list. Moreover, the damage reduction and soft healing granted by his rain swords provides great defensive utility against the often bloodthirsty monsters of the abyss. For an 80 energy burst support, Xingqiu's self-sufficiency in energy generation is convenient, as his best-in-slot sacrificial sword is a 4-star weapon that allows him to regenerate at least 3/4 of its burst with 2 consecutive elemental skills. On this note, his elemental skill is a 2-hit combo with a surprisingly high total multiplier, rivaling Child's ranged stance burst. So, the Guhua Geek's direct damage output is also not to be underestimated. All of his constellations provide consistent increments to both his damage and utility, making him a valuable asset that grows gradually stronger as you play the game. At this point, I think most people can already guess who the top 3 are going to be. In terms of power and utility, the big 3 are nearly neck and neck, and I thus had quite a hard time ordering them. All 3 can not only provide damage but also play unrivaled, distinctive supporting roles in any composition. Thus, bear in mind that their rankings are close to interchangeable, and they're all cream of the crop who can find a place in almost any team. Securing a solid 3rd place spot is the Geo Archon, Zhongli. On his release, Zhongli was already an admirable shielder, but buffs to his element in 1.3 increased the strength of his crystalline protection to astronomical levels. He forms the bedrock of high-risk, high-reward teams such as those with Xiao, Hu Tao, and Melt Ganyu by providing impressive resilience to damage, alongside a universal 20% enemy resistance decrease. that doesn't mean his versatility is limited to such compositions, as Zhongli is a viable team member in almost any circumstance, as a shield not only mitigates damage, but also completely prevents interruption. The latter something that healers can't replicate at all. Geovishaps, samurais, and elemental reactions like Overload can all throw your active character off their feet, interrupting their attacks and rendering them vulnerable to further physical insult. Zhongli's shield provides cozy protection with 100% uptime against external threats, allowing you to perform team rotations with such peace of mind. Rift Hounds have undoubtedly hurt Zhongli's previously impregnable defensive dominance, and may even necessitate running a healer alongside him to mitigate corrosion. But Zhongli nonetheless provides sufficient protection against the various hostile mobs and bosses of the Abyss today. He also provides reasonable damage and petrification utility with his elemental burst, which reduces the opportunity cost of switching out the damage dealer for Zhongli. Calmly riding the winds into the second place is Kazuha. Once called a 5-star Sucrose, Kazuha has now established an unshakable niche as the best Anemo support in the entire game. His E-skill provides decent suction while dealing massive AoE damage on the plunge, to the extent that it's often joked how Kazuha kills the enemies even before the main DPS makes it onto the field. Being an Anemo character also grants him access to a universal elemental resistance shred, which amplifies the damage of all your other characters. His most viable build, revolving around elemental mastery, augments his swirl damage directly, but also synergizes well with the support aspect of his kit, as Kazuha further boosts the elemental damage bonus of all matching characters based on his EM. Overall, Kazuha is a very solid damage dealer that also profoundly enhances the damage of all characters on your team. Thus, he hasn't fallen off at all despite the introduction of enemies who are suction immune. He finds a place in virtually any team, with versatility unmatched by the lower ranking supports. Raiden, for instance, is limited mostly to burst DPS teams, whereas Xingqiu's elemental burst being triggered by normal attacks only makes him incompatible with Ganyu freeze teams. However, Kazuha finds a snug place in both varieties of teams as a damage dealer and unparalleled damage amplifier all in one. And finally, the most broken character of the game is none other than Bennett. Bennett provides similar if not greater versatility than Kazuha. He can act as a main damage dealer with his spammable elemental skill and high multiplier elemental burst, or primarily as a damage augmenting support. Given how damage in GenshinImpact scales linearly with a character's attack stat, Bennett's elemental burst buff of 600 to 1000 attack translates to an overall damage buff of between 40 to 80%. Pretty much every single character in the game is reliant on Bennett to draw out their maximum damage dealing potential, with the only exceptions being Kokomi and Albedo's elemental skill, which don't scale off attack at all. How is this different from Kazuha's nearly universal elemental damage buff? For starters, Bennett's buff can snapshot, meaning off-field DPS like Xiangling and Beidou. The buff lasts as long as the duration of the DPS elemental burst, even if Bennett's burst itself has expired. This theoretically permits a permanent buff of these DPS damage. Bennett's buff also applies to physical damage dealers as long as he isn't C6 Bennett. Bennett also provides extremely rapid healing to the active character, which is a great counterplay to the corrosion mechanic and sufficient defensive maneuver against aggressive Abyss monsters. Compared to Kazuha, Bennett's drawback lie in the limited radius of his Q and the application of Pyro status, which makes your character vulnerable to elemental reactions. Perhaps things will change in Sumeru, with Dendro appliers around every corner to massacre whoever stands within Bennett's thumbs-up circle, but as of now, that isn't nearly crippling enough to offset the aforementioned boons that make Bennett possibly the most powerful character in the entire game. That's all for the tier list, and thanks for watching.